Dark Souls 1 is a special game because it's one of the only games that absolutely gonna beat you up and absolutely make you mad at points. And yet you'll come out of it and love it. It's weird because I can admit 20 million flaws with this game, and yet I still acknowledge that it's great and I actually recommend it to people. If you haven't played it, you gotta play it. And just to prove this point, I mean, usually when I'm, making reviews for games, I end up becoming more and more negative as I think more and more about the game because I usually am focused on what's all the negatives and finding the flaws. With this game, I came in knowing the flaws. I came out not hating the game more, but rather appreciating it more, which is very rare. I also wanted to mention that, yeah, I did 100% this game, got all the achievements, so I have a general idea of most of the mechanics of this game. I mean, I haven't really played Pyromancy build, for example, so I don't know everything, but that's fine because it's a review from my perspective. Meaning, no, I'm not going to be talking about, things that other people might have experienced, because ultimately everyone's experience is different. Okay, so now let's start with the core gameplay, specifically the combat. The first thing I want to talk about combat is this game's combat, especially after playing any other Souls game before this. It feels, I guess the best word is jarring or clunky. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to note that out of all the games, it has the most unique feel. And I think the reason why is two things. Number one, unlike all the other Souls games that come after this, you cannot roll in 8 directions, meaning you can't go in diagonal rolls. You can only roll in the 4 cardinal directions. But I think the biggest contributor to why the combat in this game is so jarring and takes a while to get adjusted to is the equip load mechanic. Basically, the more you weigh, the more heavier your dodge roll becomes and the less invincibility frames you get. In this game, they punish you a lot more than any of the other games, and I did my research, and basically in all the other games after this, at 75% equip load or more, you fat roll. In this game, if you have more than 50%, you fat roll. But on top of all this, they also made it so that in this game, you actually roll slower than you would in other games. So for example, the light roll in this game is equivalent to a Dark Souls 3 medium roll. And when you put that in perspective, you really quickly realize that in this game, you just roll slower and get punished more for wearing armor. And I think the reason why is because this game is centered around bosses and enemies that tend to swing slower, have less combos, and ultimately you have a lot more room to avoid their attacks. And so if they gave you the same, system that they set up later in the later games where you can dodge roll much faster and be more evasive, it would be way too easy to play this game. And I mention this though just because it might seem like a negative thing. Oh, I dodge roll so slow. Oh my god, I can't wear as much armor. But ultimately, it's actually a lot more balanced around this game. I do admit that the whole equip load thing where 50% or more being heavy roll is a little bit overdoing it, because if you want to wear any cool armor, you might be in a tough situation, but you can level up if you really need to. The other thing about combat is that in this game especially, stamina takes a lot more of a heavier focus in this game. Almost every action besides walking in this game takes stamina out of you, which means pretty much in combat, you are thinking about stamina very often, because if you have no stamina, you pretty much can do nothing. You are not going to be avoiding an attack, you cannot swing, you're cooked. And I feel like it's very interesting because now the game is centered around balancing your stamina, and the thing about this game especially is that you can't get your stamina all that high. Yeah, you can get it pretty high, but it soft locks and hard caps pretty early on, which results in an experience of you basically having to master balancing your stamina. Anyways, yeah, now it's time to talk about leveling. I think they made a very balanced leveling system in the sense that besides health and stamina, or endurance as it's called, there is no stat that feels like it's inherently overpowered or a must-have when playing whatever class or character you want. And you could make the argument that endurance and health shouldn't be a must-have, but they're the lifeblood of your character, so you kind of need them. One of the things that's so cool is being able to build your character how you want. If you feel like, man, I don't do enough damage, and you want to play a strength build, you could just dump a 10 million levels into strength and become extremely overpowered, in your damage, but then you suffer the consequences in other aspects. Or maybe you take way too much damage, so you start leveling up resistance. You get to choose what your character is based off of how good you are. And you don't even have to do that. You could also just do challenge runs. Pretty much there's no one stat that you need to level up to beat the game. That's what I'm trying to get at. Souls in this game feel very valuable because oftentimes they're hard to come by, especially early on. And, you tend to want to hoard on to them because the levels do cost a lot in this game, so it adds a lot more tension to the exploration because ultimately a lot of times you're carrying a lot of souls on you and you don't want to die because if you die you could potentially lose all your souls. It's a very interesting detail, and also I like how they punish you for your death by saying, hey, your souls are going to stay where you died, but if you don't go back to them and collect them or you die again, they're gone. Why do I like this mechanic? Because it doesn't immediately punish you for dying, which is something that happens often, but rather punishes you for not being able to learn from your mistakes. Now, one of the things I also want to add on to this whole leveling system is the whole character building aspect of this game, which I think is one of the biggest strengths of this game, is being able to create your character how you want to. You create an attachment, a bond with your character because you start investing levels into certain things and you start getting special gear and cool armor to make your character not only look how you want it to look, but also be able to attack how you want. You basically can do whatever you want in this game and make your character as cool as you want or as stupid as you want. Maybe you want to be, look like another hollow soldier who, is just going through the motions. And sure, the game does kind of have some weaker, weapons and armors, but at the end of the day, you can make anything work because it's not about how good your stuff is necessarily, but how good is your ability to play the game. I mean, obviously, yeah, for weapons and stuff, there's obviously weapons that are just superior in a lot of aspects than other weapons, but at the end of the day, you can make any weapon work. That's what I love about this game. What I love about weapons is that there's a variety, not even in just movesets, but also just which weapons have good stat scalings and certain stats and which don't. Even just the ability to reforge your weapons and add elemental damage or whatnot, chaos damage, even just being able to take away the stat scaling and make your damage outright good. And any weapon. It means that you can make a weapon that is incredibly good in strength and just turn it into an all-around good weapon for just damage overall, meaning you don't really have to level up your stats necessarily. If you want to rock around a nice greatsword, but you didn't really want to level up the strength, you could make it work easily by just reforging a certain way. And that's pretty nice. I personally don't do that, but I wouldn't do that if I were you, but you can do it. Something I want to add also is the whole, with the whole elemental system and the whole elemental reforge system, is I do appreciate that these elemental reforges require you to find specific blacksmiths for each element. So like the chaos and the fire elements are found as specific blacksmiths, and they're not just found in one generic blacksmith. Which forces you to actually find these blacksmiths and, explore the world, not just go to one generic guy who's at the main hub. And also, I like how there's specific titanite for each type of reforge, so that also forces you to explore more. And another thing to note also is the reforging embers, which you need to find in order to level up your weapon to a certain level. One of the things I wanted to note with this is the fact that you can easily miss these. Like, for example, the large ember, I believe it's called, which is in the depths, the first ember that you need to actually level up your weapon to plus 10. I mean, you could easily miss that in the sense that an average player who's just trying to get through an area, doesn't feel like fighting the enemies, probably won't open that chest. Now they're not able to level up their weapons, and that inherently might seem like, oh wow, that's a bad mechanic, because now if you miss something, you just can't get what you want. But at the end of the day, it's a good mechanic because it promotes exploration and actually forces you to find these things, not just rush through the level design and completely ignore what they set up for you. So in the game, there's a crap ton of items, as with all the Souls games, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a big item user, I'm a hoarder. I don't know why, I just love the idea of having a surplus of items that I'm never gonna actually use, but that's just me personally, but I do acknowledge that these items are pretty nice because, for example, the tree pine resin gives you temporary lightning buff on your sword weapons. Instead of investing in maybe adding lightning to your sword permanently, maybe you just use that instead to have an advantage temporarily. And these items can be used to help you if you're really struggling, which is something that I think a lot of people don't probably use. Obviously, this is balanced because of the idea that they're kind of hard to come by. Not most of the items are very temporary and probably not getting a huge surplus of them. So let's go on the world. Now the world in this game is absolutely amazing. It is the main aspect I think makes this game super unique and stand out. You're in a gigantic kingdom. You're in Lordran, right? And the game does a good job at making the place feel like it's all one area, right? It's interconnected. Every area you go to is somehow connected to another area, which makes sense. but also the areas are so diverse. Like somehow they made this big kingdom of Lordran have areas such as Blighttown, New Londo Ruins somehow exist, and then you have Darkroot Gardens. And if you just compare these three areas, they all are so unique. Blighttown is got this like swampy feel, abandoned area. It's underneath Firelink Shrine somehow. And then it's right next to New Londo Ruins, which also happens to be this really unique area that's like a cave system that's completely flooded with an abandoned like city. And then you got Darkroot Garden, which is one of the only places that has nature remotely, right? And being able to do all of this and have those all three of those areas connected to each other, by the way, would like to note that they're all very easy to access to each other. Even though they seem like they'd be far apart, is so cool. There's just so much variety, and it's impressive when you consider it's all one big kingdom. How do you make one big kingdom feel like it is still a kingdom while having variety and not even the looks, the levels, but just the layouts? It's impressive. But the biggest thing is the fact that the world is interconnected and feels real. And the problems with the later Souls games is that they tend to do this thing where, oh, you go down one path and it just leads you down this whole weird path that's completely its own thing, which is fine, but with this game, you go down a path, for example, from Firelink Shrine, and you end up seeing areas that you can go to later, or sometimes it even leads to areas you've been to. There's so many examples. The obvious one is, oh, you go to Undead Parish, you get through the church, takes about 2 hours your first playthrough, and then you find this elevator that goes down to Firelink Shrine. You're like, what? This links back to Firelink Shrine? You could even go to the example of going to the depths, getting through Blighttown. You're thinking, wow, you're so far away from Firelink Shrine, just to find out that it links all the way back to Firelink Shrine somehow in this massive elevator. You're like, how is that possible? And there's even other examples. For example, into the Valley of Drakes, there's literally a path that just ends up leading straight to Darkroot Garden, which then you can open a door right there that leads to Undead Parish. It's crazy how you can go from being stuck in Blighttown to going to the Darkroot Garden straight to Undead Parish. Or no, not Undead Parish. Undead Burg, I meant to say. Going straight to Undead Burg in the matter of like 2 minutes. Where does that happen? What other game do you have? It makes the world feel so much more real. One of the cool things about having, the whole world interconnected and everything feeling like it's part of one big thing is you can even see in the background of areas you will be in. Like for example, if you're at the top of Sense Fortress, you can literally see the Duke's archives. And if you're in Undead Parish and it's at the top of the roof, you can literally see Sense Fortress. You can literally physically see where you would be or where you could be in the future. That's really cool. I mess with it a lot. The big thing is also the world feels so much more real because you often have to walk through it often, especially on the first half of the game where there's no teleportation of bonfires, which, by the way, let's talk about that. In the first half of the game, I would imagine a lot of people probably thought, oh, you can't travel between bonfires or teleport. That's so annoying. And sometimes it is because, yeah, for example, if you're in the depths or in Blighttown, and you want to go back up, you really can't. You can technically, but it's going to take a while, right? But the positive of this is that it forces you to run through areas multiple times over and actually try to find shortcuts. It promotes more exploration because oftentimes there are shortcuts. There's secret paths between bonfires, key bonfires, or shortcuts that lead back to Firelink Shrine. Like I said earlier, in the other Souls games, it's kind of like you never have a reason to go back because once you go and fully explore an area, you're just moving on to the next area and you move past it. And so oftentimes, areas in the later Souls games are cool, but they're not as memorable as in this game because ultimately you're going in these areas often and they're built for that. They built the maps so that you can traverse it easily. And once the whole idea of backtracking through areas becomes tedious, they introduce the Lord Vessel. Once you get to Androlondo, yeah, obviously no one wants to just backtrack all the way to Firelink Shrine because I don't want to go through Sen's Fortress and all that. So yeah, then they introduced the Lord Vessel, and the way they even introduced the Lord Vessel to me is very genius in the sense that they don't just allow you to teleport between any bonfire. No, they only allow you to teleport between key bonfires. Meaning you still have to sometimes backtrack or do long walks. It's not like you can just teleport. And the greatest way to explain this is it's kind of like something like Skyrim, right? In Skyrim, they have this beautiful world that is super cool, and yet, once you unlock fast travel or explore an area, you're able to fast travel there, you never will ever explore ever again. You just fast travel constantly. You never actually sit down and admire the world around you because you're more focused on, okay, I just need to get here. It takes away from the whole world they built, and I think that's ultimately why this works, because you get to experience the world they built out it being incredibly obnoxious. I mean, seriously, imagine if you could just mindlessly fast travel to wherever you wanted to. You would never really ever in the second half of the game really explore the world after you've done it once. You know, another thing to know about bonfires that I like is having multiple key bonfires, or better known as the bonfires watched over the bonfire keepers, is very cool because they're placed in like the areas that would be considered like main hubs. For example, the two that I can think of off the dome is Firelink Shrine and the one in Androlondo. And, you know, these obviously are key bonfires in the sense that they lead to multiple areas and you will come back here often. And these bonfires reward you with more flask, which I think is really cool because of the fact that it rewards the idea of finding ways to link back up to the main bonfire or making the path easier so that you can make a longer run back but get a lot more flask for a boss. Like, for example, Firelink Shrine, you're stuck on the Capra Demon, there's literally a path that leads to the Taurus Demon straight from Firelink Shrine, but at the cost of a longer run back, right? So you're sacrificing your time, but you get more flask. So it opens up the idea of like, should I be using the bonfires or not? Another thing I like about the world in general is just how the game doesn't really tend to lock you out of areas. For the most part, you can kind of just go wherever you want, whenever you want. There's no specific way to play the game necessarily. I mean, obviously, yeah, when you start out the game, you probably should just go to Undead Burg, but you don't have to technically. You could just go the other paths if you really wanted to, and the game's not going to stop you from going to Tomb of the Giants at the very beginning, which people will see as a negative, but I think it's a positive because ultimately you have full control of how you explore the world and what you uncover first, which means it's up to you, the player, to decide, should I be here or not? I think the most impressive part about the world really is the fact that it's a linear game that doesn't feel linear ever. Besides like the midway point and the very end, it never really feels linear because there's always so many options to go down. You never have to go down one specific route. When the Lord Vessel gets placed, you don't have to immediately go to, for example, Tomb of the Giants first. You could decide, I'm not going to Tomb of the Giants till later and go straight to Lost Isles or whatever you want, which makes the world feel a lot more open, even though at the end of the day, it's very linear. Okay, now I want to lead to the whole big point, exploration. This is going to be covering the level design rather than just the world. I will say this, and I will say this, the fact that this game, at heart, is an exploration game, and the game leans into it. What I mean by this is, let's take an example of Mario. A lot of people will play Mario, any 2D Mario game, and completely just they'll go through the levels, go through the motion, beat the game, and they've gone through the levels, but they haven't fully explored. But if you actually stopped and fully explored the levels, you get so much more out of the game. For example, you can find secret levels, secrets, power-ups, you know, maybe even a secret pipe to a shortcut or something. And that is ultimately the best example I can give to what makes this game good. The best areas in this game are just like Mario levels when they're fully fleshed out and designed well, since that there's so many secrets and things to discover. But you don't have to do it. But if you do, you get so much more out of the game. I decided to take this game very slow and actually fully explore it for the most part, most of the areas, and kill the enemies. And when you do that, you get so much more out of the game because, for one, you master areas that would be you struggle to normally, but also the main factor is finding items and secrets is super enjoyable. In fact, I'd make the argument that the best areas of this game almost always are areas that promote exploration. The best examples I can come up with, my personal favorite areas up there areas, for example, is Undead Burg. Undead Burg is full of so many secrets. I mean, there's literally even a secret path that allows you to get on top of a rooftop. And there's just so many different areas to find. Even though the items are not usually great, there's so much to find and unravel that you could easily pass up without even thinking about it or noticing. But seeing that item in the distance that you're trying to figure out how to get to and figuring out how to get to it, oh, it just feels great. Another example, and this might be a hot take, is Blighttown. Now, I know Blighttown's not that loved, but you know, when you take it slow and actually start exploring it, you end up discovering that this area has got a lot to uncover. And actually, you know, surviving and making it through sketchy areas to get to that chest, for example, or those items you see in the distance, is super rewarding, especially in an area like here where low-key is just a pain to go through. But there, the biggest thing about Blighttown is that's the whole vertical section. But when you look at the bottom half, oh my God, there's so many items to find. You just have to walk through the whole bottom, and you'll find that there's secret crevices with items, or even better yet, there's literally a whole secret area that's hidden behind two hidden walls. Ultimately, yes, Blighttown is actually really enjoyable to explore because there's so much to find. These areas all have something in common, which is that they have a lot of different paths that are optional, that have items to find, and it's very rewarding to do so. And the areas that tend to suck do not promote exploration remotely, or just have a tedious way of exploring. And I hate to break it to everybody, but that's the second half of the game. So yeah, let's talk about the second half of the game. So everyone says, oh, the first half of the game is so much better than the second half, which for the most part I agree with. But I think the biggest thing is when you look at area for area, the second of the half of the game, area for area, is just not good. Most of these areas are not good, and frankly, a lot of these problems stem from the problem of exploring them is not that fun. It's not just as simple as saying, oh, there's no items to find in the second half of the game. No, that's not the problem necessarily, but it's usually because they have annoying gimmicks tied to them that doesn't really make it feel rewarding enough to explore. For example, Tomb of the Giants, an area that I just had to talk about at some point. It just sucks. Like, sure, there's items to find and you can explore it. There's not too much to explore, but at the end of the day, it is absolutely tedious to go through this area to the point where exploring it for items is almost not worth it in my opinion because not being able to see is so annoying that I would much rather just try to get through this area than ever stay here for any longer than I need to. And also, I want to make this very clear. Whoever thought this was a good idea to make a whole area dedicated to not being able to see while having massive pits everywhere, yeah, I hope you lost your job. Why was that ever an idea that you thought was fun? Okay, and then obviously Lost Izalith. Lost Izalith is the prime example of why the game is good because it does almost everything wrong that there can be done wrong. For one, Lost Izalith has pretty much nothing to find because it's pretty much just a linear path directly to the boss. Sure, there's like a blue Titanite slab or red, I forgot, there's like a chest you can find, a few items beaten off the path, but for the most part, there's nothing to find. There's no secret paths. There's no items actually. It feels like there's almost no items to find at all to begin with. And so exploring the area is just not really a thing, and going through the area is not fun because there's nothing to do here. You're just running through the area. I mean, that's literally all this area is running through it because there's nothing that you want to interact with here. Now, there are other reasons why these two areas in specific also just are not that great, but we'll cover that in a second. But I mean, exploration-wise, you can see clearly when the areas don't have promote exploration and don't have a lot to find, or it's not really fun to find stuff, those areas tend to not be fun. These two areas, by the way, I want to make this very clear. These two areas are so bad that literally no other area in the entire game compares, in my opinion. No other area compares to how bad these areas are. Yeah, and I think that's a big factor, by the way, as to why people complain about the second half, because ultimately, when you have two of the worst areas in the entire game, it's back to back in the second half of the game, you can't go, oh, I love the second half of the game. You just can't. I did say, yeah, there's other reasons why these areas suck, and that's because of the bosses. The biggest problem with bosses in this game overall, the reason why I can't really say I love them that much, is that they tend to be a joke to fight. And yes, they are a challenge the first time, but that's true for pretty much anything in this game, or any Souls game for the most part. Probably going to struggle off the times, unless it's Dark Souls 2, but that's a whole different can of worms. My point though really is just that once you get adjusted to the whole combat and get used to how weird it is feeling wise, you'll realize these bosses are not that hard. And the main reason why is because oftentimes their attacks are very rudimentary and give a lot of room to avoid. And I'm not here to say that, the Elden Ring style of let's swing 500 times over in a row and then give you a 1 second room to heal is great either, because that's way too far on the spectrum. But you gotta have some challenge. The bosses that tend to be the best in this game tend to be the ones that push you. You're understanding the mechanics of the game, or actually are just challenging in general. Examples of these are for example, Ornstein Smo. I love this boss because it's a challenge. but it's a fair challenge. That's another thing I want to add. It's fair. Where you kind of have to master the ability of reading both of them guys at once so that you don't take advantage damage, and you also have to be wary of your spacing because if you go into fight Smo, for example, and Ornstein is right next to you, yeah, you're probably getting hit. I hate to break it to you. Another example of an actual great boss is the final boss himself, the Lord of Cinder. Even though his attack pattern is super rudimentary, he is very punishing in the sense that if you heal once, he immediately punishes you. So you just can't get hit, which, I actually mess with that. Four Kings. It's another great boss fight because its attacks are actually very fun to dodge. They also are challenging because they tend to have you have to kill them in a very timely manner, or else it just becomes an impossible fight. Big key details I want to take away from the best boss fights, the ones that stand out in my opinion, and I like actually a lot, is that they tend to have faster pacing and are punishing. I don't think that just because they're difficult makes them good, but they challenge you. A lot of the bosses just don't challenge you, and I'm just gonna go over all the bosses that I think are just There's so many examples, but the first one, just go over, the second half of the game bosses mainly. Gravelord Nito, he's got this annoying run back that's absolutely annoying, but once you fight the boss, he's actually not that hard at all. Yeah, sure, he has skeletons around him, but I mean, you can just like make him walk to you, so those skeletons don't aggro, and once you do, you realize he only has like 3 attacks, and they're really obviously telegraphed. So it's not a hard fight, but the whole run back there, ooh, it's rough. Which makes me not really enjoy the fight because the fight's not even really worth the run back. I know they tried to balance it, obviously, by the way. I want to make it clear, yes, they tried to balance, oftentimes try to make a balance between the run back and the actual difficulty. I feel like the bosses that tend to have a longer run back in general tend to be the ones that are way too easy. Again, another example, Cease the Scaleless. I mean, it's a long run back to get there, but he's not actually hard because you just stay near his right tail or his left tail, and you're probably not getting hit. If you are, I mean, it's usually because you're an idiot. It's not a hard fight remotely. The run back, oh, it's very long and very easy to die. Another example, Iron Golem. Don't particularly find him hard, remotely interesting to fight. He's actually one of the easiest bosses in the game, but his run back can be annoying depending on if you found the bonfire or not. And even if you did, it's still a long run back. I think the biggest problem with these fights in general, most of these fights I named, is that they feel disappointing. Especially the fact that 2 of the 3 bosses I gave as examples literally at the second half of the game and should be end game bosses, and yet they feel like they are not. That's a problem. And then the bad bosses, okay? Because, yeah, there's some outright bad bosses, and I want to talk about them. And, yeah, by the way, hint hint, they're almost all in Lost Izalith. But the only one that I really hate and despise that's not in Lost Izalith is Capra Demon, because I just think that the Capra Demon has the problem of having a very annoying run back and a very annoying boss. I'm not going to here to say the boss is impossible or absolutely horrifically designed, because that's just not true necessarily, but having 2 wolves gank up on you in a very, very small, confined room is just not enjoyable remotely, because you have way too little room to avoid damage. And also the run back, like I said, is absolutely feces in the sense that it's a long run back with lots of wolves in a confined space. And if you do take the other route, there's still wolves in the path, so you're pretty much guaranteeing damage, which is just annoying. And another bad boss fight, Ceaseless Discharge. You can also interchange this with Moonlight Butterfly. The best way to describe these bosses is they both have the gimmick of, oh, once I do a specific move, then you can attack me, but I can attack you whenever I feel like. Ceaseless Discharge is more annoying just because, like, I mean, literally the gameplay is, oh, wait until he slams his arm down, hit him a bunch of times, and wait, he does it again. You're interacting with his arm, not the actual full boss. And the greatest example of the boss I hate the most, and everyone expected this probably, is the Bed of Chaos. There's not much to say. I mean, it literally does the sin of having a horrific run back and a horrific boss. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, everything that could have been said has already been said, so I'm not going to harp on it too long. Just know, yeah, they did not think about this boss fight remotely. They did not balance it. But yeah, the biggest problem with the bad boss fights, and I didn't even name all of them, there's a couple other ones, but I don't want to just be too long. The biggest problem with these the bad boss fights, is they tend to be unbalanced in the sense that they usually have either horrific mechanics or just have long runbacks and are bad. So yeah, when I look at the boss lineup of this game, while I do have some bosses I like for the most part, unlike the other games, there's not many bosses I'm taking out of this that actually want to keep. Yeah, I just hate to break it to everybody, but this is not a good lineup. It is not at all. And, this ties in with my next point, which is difficulty. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people get this misconception that these games are enjoyable because they're difficult. I mean, I did just say that a lot of the bosses are not, challenging enough or difficult enough. But that's not the main reason why this game's great. Honestly, I think that's why a lot of people misinterpret these games in general, because they see, oh, it's difficult. That's, ooh, make the game difficult, it's automatically gonna be good. No, 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 no. It's the difficulty done is done in a fair way where almost every time you're struggling, for the most part, besides like things like Bed of Chaos, you are struggling because you are not understanding the game enough. You have to deepen your understanding of the mechanics of the game. Understand, okay, maybe I'm not leveled up enough in this stat, or maybe I should change my armor, or even just maybe I should adjust how I'm playing the game and not dodge roll here. Once you realize that, you realize that at the end of the day, the game is difficult but fairly. Which is ultimately why when people beat this game for the first time, including me, they feel a sense of accomplishment because they finally understood the game enough to beat it. So, you know what? This is a good time to bring in the couple things I wanted to mention with just unfair difficulty, because there are a few moments, which sounds hypocritical, but there are a few moments that are just not really fair difficulty necessarily. For example, the most obvious one I wanted to bring up, but I didn't know when to, is the whole curse. When you get affected by the curse from Basilisk, I think that is completely bad difficulty because at the end of the day, it literally makes the game 10 times more punishing for one little mistake. I mean, literally, oh, I died to one little, effect, and now I permanently have less, half HP permanently until I solve this problem. And solving that problem is not fun remotely and is insanely annoying because, for example, where you're most likely going to get cursed, the depths, you're going to have to run back all the way back up to, either Undead Parish, or you're going to have to go into stupid New Londra Ruins at half HP. And you have to avoid all the enemies on the path. And if you don't do that, oh, now you're just in a really bad situation. Why are they designing that? Just want to point that out. That was like arguably the most unfair, bad difficulty thing they've done. Another thing to point that I think it kind of is a good point is how vague the game is, difficulty wise. Because while I don't fully agree with, oh, the game is so vague, that's such a bad thing, I do admit that at some points it's a little too vague. The game doesn't hold your hand, obviously, which is good because it means that you get to, explore the world for yourself and figure out all the problems for yourself and make your character who you are yourself instead of something telling you, oh, get this sword or make sure to repair your sword. So you have to actually learn the game yourself, which is what makes this game super nice. Sometimes it's a little too vague, especially when it comes to NPCs. If you wanted to complete a quest line, good luck, because without a guide, you're not doing that. It's just adding difficulty for what? And also, even the greatest example of this is literally getting into the DLC, which is so vague that if you were to do it blindly, you would never get into the DLC. Because, oh, you gotta save this NPC that's behind this basilisk, which most people don't even kill, and then, oh, you can save this NPC, then you have to relog the game to get her to show up, which is so weird. And then, oh, now you can be able to get a specific item from one enemy in the entire game in one specific location. That is way too vague, and it's not even stated clearly remotely. Now, yes, Google exists for a reason, but that should never be a thing you have to worry about. It's just adding unnecessary difficulty to the game. And as for the DLC, I'm not covering that just because it takes too long. And just to sum up my thoughts on the DLC very quickly is, yeah, it basically takes all the problems with the game and just says, we'll do everything right. Like, every problem is fixed. The boss lineup is phenomenal. The area is phenomenal. There's no area that's in that DLC that's absolutely horrible to go through. Everything is great. If you haven't played the DLC, just play it. The boss lineup is so good. It just, playing that made me realize how bad the bosses are in the base game. Ultimately, this game is great because, one, you have full control of how the game plays. There's no helping hand that's going to save you from problems. I mean, two, the world is just phenomenally made. It feels like every detail was crafted perfectly and meticulously, and it feels like even the enemy placements were made just with so much thought in their head. Sure, there's a couple areas not the case, but for the most part, it feels like every area was made with so much intention behind it. Being able to build up your character to how you want is great. These things make the game so great. Being able to have full control over your character without any limits is ultimately a good thing. And more games should be doing that. Stop holding our hands. I do wish I was able to cover more things in detail because I did miss a lot, and there's a lot of moments in this game that I couldn't cover, but it's at the cost of this thing being way too long and me rambling on for way too long because I got all the points I want to cover. I don't want to cover anything else. I mean, sure, there's hundreds of other examples I can give, but ultimately I just want to give the main points across. So, yep, that's it.